Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the questions being raised about the Election Commission after two incidents that took place in Assam. We also take a quick look at why the Sensex crashed yesterday. But first, we talk about the COVID-19 surge in Maharashtra. On Sunday, India's daily COVID cases reached a new peak when more than 1 lakh cases were reported for the first time ever. Now, out of these cases, 57,000 were reported in Maharashtra alone. Now, it is because of this surge that the Maharashtra government has now imposed a limited lockdown in the state. In this segment, Tabassum Barnagarwala joins us to talk about these restrictions, to what extent they will help the situation, and how the surge is affecting the state's health infrastructure. Tabassum, Maharashtra has been reporting a sharp rise in the number of COVID cases. How does this rise in numbers compare to what the state witnessed last year?
See, last year in September, when Maharashtra saw its first peak, the total number of active cases was somewhere above 3 lakh. And the state had estimated that when there is a second wave, which they did estimate around January and February, they had thought that we will probably cross the first peak and add 10% more cases to the active pool. So they were estimating somewhere around 3.30 to 3.50 lakh active cases maximum. But since March, when there has been a sudden surge in several districts like Nagpur, Thane, Mumbai, Pune, and now rural parts of Maharashtra, our total active case pool has gone way beyond the estimates. As on Monday morning, we had 4.30 lakh active cases in the entire state. The state was also expecting daily cases to not go beyond 30,000. Last year, our maximum daily caseload was above 24,000. But as on Sunday, the latest case pool for Maharashtra was 57,074 cases. This has been the highest ever daily caseload that Maharashtra has recorded. Till now, we've been recording cases less than 50,000. So cases are going to continue rising. We still not reached the peak. A lot of officials that I have been speaking with are estimating that by mid-April or by end of April, we'll be reaching our second peak, and then there'll be a gradual decline in cases.
So, when we talk about this rise in cases, people not following enough COVID guidelines is one aspect of it, and which has somewhat remained consistent in the state and was there last year as well, right? But what do experts say about why we are seeing this rise right now?
So the Union Health Minister has been very consistent, and it has been stating that there is no relation between the mutation and the surge that we are seeing in Maharashtra. But when we talk at district level and with health officials in local urban bodies, uh, the concern that they have is that mutation is driving the surge to a certain extent, and it is not just limited to the COVID appropriate behavior that people exhibit. For example, there were hundreds of samples sent from Maharashtra for genome sequencing, and in 206 samples, there were double mutations found, which was E484Q and L452R. Now, these are escaping mutations, which basically escape the immune response, and they're still able to infect a larger population as compared to what we were seeing last year. So, until last year we were seeing that in one family maybe one or two people were infected, but now in places like Nanded, Nagpur, Yavatmal, Amravati, we are seeing that entire families are infected with COVID-19. This shows that the transmission pattern has changed. So mutation is, I think, to a great extent responsible for the surge, although there needs to be more genome sequencing done to understand how rampant the mutation is in the new infected population.
Okay, so in light of this rise, the government has now imposed fresh restrictions in the state. Could you talk about what they involve?
So on April 4th, the Maharashtra government issued a series of restrictions for the entire state, which will include night curfew. From 8 p.m. till 7 a.m., more than four people cannot gather outside in public places. There's also going to be a total weekend lockdown wherein there'll be no activities allowed except essential services. Apart from that, the government has now announced closure of all shopping malls, theaters, gymnasiums, swimming pools, all inside sports activities, parlors, beauty parlors, salons, and pubs, restaurants, and bars. So one, it's not a complete lockdown per se, but it's going to have an indirect impact on a lot of daily wage laborers. For example, we've been speaking with a lot of migrant laborers who are in job of painting, who are working in restaurants, who are working as at construction sites. Directly, there has been no shutdown of any development activities of any construction sites. But say if there is a garment shop which is going to be shut, workshop which stitches clothes is not going to have as much work to do, and their laborers are going to get affected. So there's going to be an indirect effect that we are going to see in the coming days on a lot of daily wage laborers.
And what do experts say about the extent to which this limited lockdown will help the current COVID situation?
A lot of experts are actually saying that this is not going to help break the chain. But I'll tell you what the health department of Maharashtra is of the opinion. Initially the health department, that is specifically talking about the health secretary, said that lockdown is not the solution. We need to test, trace, and treat patients, and we need to do it aggressively and quickly. That was their motto, and that was how they were working about. But when we crossed 4 lakh active infections, Maharashtra's entire health system sort of started crumbling. We have more than 3 lakh isolation beds in Maharashtra. And in a lot of districts, the oxygen beds are now completely exhausted. The ICUs and ventilators are close to coming to their full capacity. And the health department is saying that if we have so many cases each day, we cannot handle the load. Eventually, we will have to turn away patients from the hospital. So lockdown has been the last resort, which now the health department has actually advocated in Maharashtra, that we need to have a lockdown because we need to reduce the daily number of cases. We are not able to handle the burden that we are seeing each day. So lockdown will actually not break the chain, but what it will do is it will slow down the whole viral transmission process, and it will allow the hospitals to treat patients on a day-to-day basis. So the idea behind the lockdown, I think, is to reduce the daily number of cases and spread it over a longer period of time. Instead of having, say, 57,000 cases in a day, they are hoping that they'll get 30 to 40,000 cases in a day, which is possible to sort of treat. So that is the whole idea behind the lockdown. But the Relief and Rehabilitation Department Secretary has been very clear that they do not want to put a full stop on development activities. So they have allowed construction work, they have allowed industries to work, although at limited capacity. They have not shut down the public transport. The trains, flights, buses are still going to continue working. Buses will have to work at 50% capacity. And what they've done is they've completely shut down private offices because work from home is still possible at this point.
Also, to what extent is the government trying to use, the current vaccination drive as a strategy to bring down the number of cases?
See, vaccination is a huge tool in this whole control mechanism that the government has formulated, apart from test, trace, and treat. As on Sunday, Maharashtra reported 4.2 lakh people vaccinated in a single day, which is the highest ever for any state in India. So there is a great push in that direction that we want to vaccinate as many people as possible in a single day. And Maharashtra, as of now, has the highest number of vaccinations, more than 73 lakh. It is closely followed by Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan. So vaccination is an important intervention that they are looking at. But what is also happening is a lot of people who are getting their first dose have become complacent and they are not following prevention mechanism or protocol as strictly as they used to before, which is why we are seeing a lot of cases where there is a COVID infection post first vaccination. So one thing that even the health minister here has been emphasizing on is that you are supposed to follow your COVID appropriate behavior even after your second dose, because it takes time for the immunity to build, and there is no guarantee that you will not get COVID infection or you will not get hospitalized after your vaccination.
And the other thing that you have written about is that now with the cases rising, it is forcing people from rural areas where adequate health facilities aren't available to come to cities and find hospital beds there. Could you talk about how people have been struggling in this regard?
Yes, so in the first year of the pandemic, that is 2020, we were seeing that the pandemic was limited to urban areas and it had penetrated rural areas on a very superficial level. As a result of which, the entire focus of the health infrastructure was on urban areas. What has happened this year is the complete opposite. We are seeing the cases rise from rural areas and then spread in urban areas. in districts like Nagpur, Nashik, Nandurbar, Gadchiroli, Yavatmal, Jalna, Jalgaon, there's a huge surge in cases in the rural areas. A problem that has now occurred is that there are not enough hospitals, COVID care centers, and dedicated COVID health facilities to treat these patients. For example, in Nandurbar, there's a tribal hamlet called Dhargaon, where there is not even a single COVID care center. So all the patients from there are supposed to travel some 40 to 50 kilometers to Shahada and Nandurbar, where there is a basic facility for institutional care. So people are basically forced to travel long distances. If they are gasping for breath, if they need oxygen support, they are not getting it immediately at the village level where they are staying. They again have to hire private vehicles because ambulances are not available everywhere. And once they're reaching urban centers are already catering to the urban population. Now they have to take the load of the rural population. So the urban health infrastructure is overburdened at this point. In Nashik, where we visited, we saw that there were people coming from 60 to 80 kilometers away to Nashik city for treatment, and Nashik city hospitals were completely full because they were treating the city population plus the rural population. So there is a disparity at this point. But what the Maharashtra government is now doing is that it is starting COVID care centers in rural and tribal areas. That process is underway. In some places it has started, in some places it will start in a week or so. But they're trying to provide at least primary level of treatment in different talukas.
And if we were to talk about testing and containment, how is the state doing when it comes to that? Is it testing enough right now?
Maharashtra is testing anywhere between 1.5 lakh to 2 lakh people in a day. Until February, the daily test numbers were around 20,000 to 50,000. So there has been a sharp increase in the overall number of tests that are happening. In Mumbai specifically, we were having around 10,000 tests in a day until January and February. And now we've crossed 50,000 mark for daily testing. What we're also observing is that the positivity rate is increasing, which shows that the infectivity is much higher than it was at the start of this year. On Sunday, Mumbai's positivity rate was more than 20%, as compared to January when our positivity rate was varying between 4 to 6%. So there is definite rise in infection, and the state has completely increased its, like, it is utilizing the entire RT-PCR capacity. It is also now using antigen test at different points. Before entering a mall, it is compulsory to get an antigen test done. At various stations, antigen testing facility has been installed. So they're trying to sort of get hold of people in public places and test them. Even at Gateway of India in Mumbai, we have a testing facility now.
Next, we talk about the Election Commission, the autonomous body that is in charge of conducting free and fair elections in India. Now, over the past week, questions have been raised by many about the independence and functioning of the Election Commission. And this is because of two decisions that the body took in the state of Assam, where assembly elections have been taking place. In fact, its third and final phase of the election is taking place today. The first decision in this regard was the repolling that was ordered in one of the constituencies of Assam. And the second one was the campaign ban that the EC had ordered against the senior BJP leader Himanta Biswa Sarma. In this segment, Ritika Chopra, who writes on the Election Commission for the newspaper, joins us to talk about these two decisions. And she starts by talking about the repolling decision. The EC, after an incident, had ordered that repolling should happen in one particular polling booth in the Rathaburi constituency.
What had happened is that on the 1st of April, when the second phase of polling took place, after voting was wrapped up, the EVMs are actually transported to their strong rooms. These are rooms where they are stored till the date of counting. So when EVMs were actually being transported to their respective strong rooms, what had happened is that around 9 o'clock, if I'm not wrong, that night after polling finished around 6, when the EVM for a polling station at a school, this was a polling station 149, when this EVM was being transported by the polling party, their car broke down on the way to the strong room.
The polling party that Ritika mentions here is essentially in charge of safely transporting the voting machine, that is the EVM, from the polling booth to the strong room. This party usually includes the presiding officer and a few other election officers. In this case, when the polling party's car broke down, Ritika says that the presiding officer informed the sector officer that this had happened and that they needed a replacement vehicle.
What happened is that they eventually, without waiting for the replacement vehicle, hitched a ride in a private car. This is where the Election Commission's version of what happened is that these officers hitched a ride in a private car and they didn't bother to check the ownership details of the car. And a little bit after they had started in this car, rather closer to the strong room, their car was intercepted by a mob, quote unquote mob, of about 50 people. And this mob started heckling, and it was basically a very belligerent mob. The commission says this is the time after the interception of their car that the polling party realizes that it's made a mistake because the car belongs to the spouse of a BJP candidate of a neighboring assembly, not the same, not Rathabori assembly seat, but of the neighboring assembly seat.
Now, after this, the mob started making videos of the car, highlighting that it belongs to the wife of a BJP candidate and that it has an EVM inside it. These videos also surfaced online late Thursday night. Ritika says that according to the polling party, the mob held them hostage for over an hour there, and they were only rescued after the local police intervened and helped calm the mob down.
When this whole instance came to the commission's notice, they sought a report from their officers on the ground. And based on the report of those officers, the commission suspended the entire polling party, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the presiding officer and 3 other election officers, for what they acknowledge is a violation of their transport protocol for polled EVMs. So the commission acknowledges that yes, something went wrong. Technically, these machines were taken into private custody, which is not allowed, because given that they sat into a private vehicle and that vehicle belongs to someone related to the BJP candidate, so I mean they felt that this was wrong.
Though, in the statement that was released by the Election Commission a day later, it said that when the EVM was found, it was untampered with. Its seal was found intact. But Ritika says that because the perception of a free and fair election had been hurt, to remedy that, the Election Commission ordered repolling in that one particular polling booth in the Rathabori Constituent Assembly. And it also took action against the people involved.
Aside from the suspension of those 4 officers, the commission also suspended another 2 security officers. So what happens is when the polling party travels, it also travels with this escort vehicle of security officers who are supposed to ensure the security of the polling party and the EVM that's being transported. So apparently when their car broke down, it seems that they got separated from this escort vehicle, and the commission feels that the escort vehicle should have tried to find out what exactly happened instead of continuing on this journey to the strong room. So another 2 security officers have also been placed under suspension for this incident. So this is what happened in the case of a specific polling station, Rathabori seat.
We now talk about the second decision that was taken by the Election Commission. This decision was to put a 48-hour campaign ban on Himanta Biswa Sarma, who is one of the key leaders of the BJP campaign in Assam and even a possible chief minister candidate. Ritika tells us what happened.
So last week, the commission had issued a notice on a Congress complaint to Himanta Biswa Sarma because the Congress had complained that in one of his rallies, I think on the 28th of March, Congress had alleged that Sarma had openly threatened to send the Bodoland People's Party chief. His name is Hagrama Mohilari. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. That he threatened to send him to jail by quote-unquote misusing the National Investigation Agency, which is the NIA. And the Bodoland People's Party, I think I should mention here, is part of the Congress-led alliance. So, which is why the Congress had complained that this is what he had said. While Mr. Sarma had replied, the commission was felt that his response was unsatisfactory, and it decided to, same day as it ordered the repoll for that specific polling station in Ratapuri, the commission subsequently in the evening brought out an order announcing that it has banned Mr. Sarma from campaigning for 48 hours.
This was significant because only 48 hours were left before campaigning was to stop in the region. So because of this ban, Sarma would not have been able to campaign in the last 2 days of the campaigning season. But the reason we are talking about this now is because a day later, the Election Commission changed its decision. It reduced the ban from 48 hours to 24 hours. In its order, the commission said that Sarma had made a representation to the EC the next morning.
And in that representation, he has apologized unconditionally and assured that he will abide by the Model Code of Conduct. And based on that assurance and accepting his apology, the commission said that it is withdrawing, rather not withdrawing, but relaxing its ban and bringing it down to 24 hours. Yeah, so that's what happened. But in that order, it also mentioned, and this is again an argument that had been made by Sarma in his plea to the commission, that he is a candidate from the Jalakpuri seat, which goes to poll in the third phase of election, which is the 6th of April. So by banning him, I mean, he's obviously a star campaigner for BJP in the state also, but given that he's a candidate and his seat goes to poll on the 6th of April, he felt that banning him for the last 48 hours could really hurt his prospects as a candidate. And the commission, rather a senior officer off record, told us that that was one big factor why the commission felt that maybe punishing a candidate, given that he seems to have realized his mistake and has given an assurance of not making such mistakes in future, that punishing a candidate maybe would be too harsh, which is why I decided to accept his request and let him campaign for the last 24 hours before electioneering ended in the state.
This decision was a rare one for the EC. But Ritika points out that it was not an unprecedented one.
The only other example that comes to my mind, and this is something that he even tried checking on that day when this order came out, was the only other example was way back in 2014, when the Election Commission, for the first time in its history, had decided to ban two prominent political leaders from campaigning any further in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And this was, I must point out, this is the 2014 Lok Sabha elections. The tone and tenor of electioneering or campaigning had really plummeted. It was getting pretty communal. And the commission took notice of the speeches made, especially by Amit Shah and Samajwadi Party's Azam Khan. And in order to send out a message, it announced that it has banned Mr. Shah and Azam Khan from further campaigning in the state of Uttar Pradesh.
She says that this was an indefinite ban and was unprecedented at that time. And Ritika says that the only way the commission was able to do this was by exercising Article 324 of the Constitution.
324, just to quickly for the benefit of the listeners, this is sort of this provision under the Constitution and under which the commission can take any decision that it deems fit for conducting an election freely and fairly in the country. So under Article 324, actually, the commission has these wide-ranging powers. Rather, I mean, it's unspecified. The commission can do everything in its wisdom that it thinks it needs to be done. So under that article, it had taken this unprecedented decision. But when Mr. Amit Shah actually wrote to the commission, he apologized and he said that he will, something similar to what Mr. Sarma said, that he will ensure that none of his utterances violate the code in future. Mr. Azam Khan, on the other hand, didn't. He was pretty defiant and he continued to sort of take on the commission. So the commission eventually did is that, look, since it's unusual, we've done it for the first time, Amit Shah has apologized and promised to not do this again. So they relaxed the ban. I mean, it was indefinite, so they just lifted the ban on Mr. Amit Shah. But that's the only example that I can think of. I mean, following 2014 elections, the commission has actually resorted to Article 324 very often to ban people from campaigning. It did that in the case of the last Lok Sabha election also in 2019. But I don't recall the commission actually rolling back a ban as it did in the case of Himanta Sarma and Amit Shah. These are the only two examples that one can think of.
Both these incidents that we talked about led to political reactions mainly from the Congress party. This included top Congress leader Priyanka Gandhi tweeting about the Rathaburi seat incident and calling for all political parties to reevaluate EVMs and their use.
So in case of Himanta Sarma's rollback of the ban on him, again, the Congress said that it was disappointed. And given that the decision was made based on the Congress complaint, they felt that they should have possibly been not asked as well, but maybe their comments should have been sought. And they said that this move raised a lot of doubts about the Election Commission's conduct and that the Commission had, quote unquote, singularly failed to discharge its duties. So the Commission came under a lot of flack for both instances.
Both these instances have led to questions being raised about the Election Commission's independence and many alleging that the Commission is bowing down to the BJP. These incidents have also come at a time when West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee has for the past few weeks been accusing the EC for having a bias towards the BJP and acting at the BJP's behest. And even though the EC doesn't usually react to such criticisms, it has now taken umbrage and reacted sharply to Mamata Banerjee's statements, calling them factually incorrect and claiming that her narrative misconstrued misdemeanor. Ritika tells us what Banerjee has been saying.
Like, for instance, the transfer of officers. The Commission has transferred a significant number of officers in West Bengal. And it has cited that example to kind of, again, accuse the Commission of doing all of this at the behest of Home Minister Amit Shah. It has objected to the increased deployment of central forces, again accusing the Commission of doing this at the behest of the Home Minister. Even when Mamata Banerjee injured her leg during an event in Nandigram, she at that point also said that law and order is Election Commission's responsibility once elections are announced and EC is not being able to ensure my security. So that's what the entire conversation conversation about elections is dominated by, where, TMC has been accusing the Commission of not doing enough to ensure a level playing field. And the Commission on a couple of occasions has, I wouldn't say hit back, but has reacted, which is, again, unusual for the Commission to do so. But I guess the Commission feels that that perception that the Trinamool Congress is trying to create may actually become more permanent if they don't react, which is why they took that step.
And in the end, we take a quick look at the Sensex crash. Yesterday, in the early trading hours, the benchmark Sensex at the Bombay Stock Exchange fell by 1,440 points or 2.9%. This was in line with India recording its highest ever COVID-19 numbers on Sunday and concerns over its impact on economic activity. Sandeep Singh, who reports on the Sensex, writes that with Maharashtra announcing a lockdown over the weekend as an initial measure and hinting at the possibility of more stringent measures to come, market participants have grown cautious over the fresh impact of COVID on the economy and the pace of recovery. The rise in COVID cases over the last month, for example, also had an impact on industrial sentiment, and there has also been a slowdown in the manufacturing sector. Though market participants also feel that since lockdown now will not be as severe as it was in 2020, there may also be market corrections as seen last year. The fact that COVID is not a new unknown anymore, and with the vaccination drive happening at a steady pace, there is a sense of some comfort within the market. However, what the market is worried about in the near term is the pace of increase in cases and the impact it may have on the economic activity and consumer demand. You were listening to 3 Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.